Oh, good morning. Hey, welcome to North Point. We're so glad that you're here with us today, and happy Father's Day. All right, I know you've been told a couple times, but I just got to retell it. And I know usually we hear from our lead pastor, Jeremy Johnson, but today Jeremy asked me to speak because I'm kind of like a dad to him. And so I'm just kidding. That's not. It's just the way that it landed on the calendar. But here's the deal. I am a father, okay, and one, I'm a dude. And there are some perks to being a dude, all right? And I can go on a trip for 5 days and all I gotta do is pack one pair of shoes. It's kind of nice. Phone conversations take 30 seconds, all right? I don't need a support group to go to the bathroom, all right? I can sit in a room with another guy watching football for 3 hours and we don't even need to say a word, and we're probably better friends after that. There's some nice things. One of my favorite things about being a dude is that I could show up to a party and I see somebody wearing the same shirt as me and we don't become enemies, we become lifelong best friends. And that is just the cool thing about being a dude, all right? So one, dude, two, I've got a family, all right? I've got a family, I'm married, I've got a couple kids, and I hope if you've got a family that you get a card today. Well, I hope you get a Father's Day card, okay? I hope it's not a get better soon card. And you're like, I'm not even sick. And they're like, we just thought you could get a little better, okay? I just hope you get a Father's Day card today. And so, but I've got a wife, Melody, okay? Shoddy like a melody in my head, all right? That's how you remember. But don't call her that. Mel, okay, is what you call her, all right? And we've been married almost 6 years. And then I've got a son who will turn 5 later on this year. And Beckham, he played his first soccer game last week, and it was awesome. He scored a goal. It was on the wrong end, and it didn't count. But I am super proud of him. I am super proud, okay? And I've got a daughter who just turned 2 on Thursday, Sloan. We call her Sloanie Baloney. And I got to be honest, I've got the cutest kid. I love my kids. And sometimes I want to sell them on eBay. And that's just the way that being a parent works. And I said that the other day, and somebody's like, don't be silly, don't sell them on eBay, you help make them sell them on Etsy. And I'm like, touche, okay. But here's what I know. Oh, anytime that I get up here, anytime I get to be up here and I get to grab a mic, I always want to just say a huge thank you. Thank you to you all. I truly love this place. I believe in this place. This place has changed my life in so many different ways. I think back 15 years ago, my wife, before I met her, Mel, she found Jesus for the first time in our student ministry, which is cool. And then Mel and I, we met at a Give Back event here at North Point. And then we started dating, we got married. We got married in the lobby right out there. Promise we made it look cute, we did. And then we had our kids here, we had our kids in a hospital, but then they were raised here, okay? They were raised here. It's so cool, but because that's the thing, I believe in our student ministry. I believe it. I'm a product of that, right? I believe in our kids ministry. My kids go there. I'm pot committed. I believe in this place. I believe in what's going on. I'll tell you this, I believe in this mission. I think that we have such a unique mission here at North Point to be a safe place to help people find and follow Jesus, which I've been to some other churches. And it's the opposite, okay? Ain't nobody safe, all right? And we're gonna chuck guilt and shame at you, right? And I've been to those places where, if you don't shape up, they'll tell you where you're gonna go and how hot it's gonna be when you get there. And I'm so thankful that we get to be a different voice. Because one, there's enough of those churches, and two, I just think it's bad theology. But I pray today that you're able to experience the hope and healing that I know my family has felt that. I know several others have, and I just hope that you're able to experience that today. But hey, we've been in this series called Betrayed by Belief. And so the past few weeks, Preston spoke a few weeks ago talking about deconstruction, where we're constantly taking our thoughts, our beliefs, and we're testing them, right? We're deconstructing them, we're reconstructing them. And we can do that when we have a firm foundation in Christ. And then Jeremy, past couple of weeks, has talked about being betrayed by mentors or leaders. And then he talked last week about being betrayed by the church. And so today, in the similar vein, okay, I want to talk about being betrayed by Christians. So Christ followers that maybe don't act so Christ-like. And which I think this title is interesting, okay? Betrayed by belief, which I gotta be honest, I have very rarely been betrayed by what somebody believes. If you came up here and you're just I believe that the earth is flat. I'm like, cool. I do not, that's good. I'm fascinated on how you came to that conclusion. But I'm not going to lose any sleep tonight. I'm like, all right, cool, you believe that. If you thought like, well, I just don't really think that we landed on the moon. I'm like, whatever. Like, sure, we can have a conversation about it, but I do not feel personally attacked because you believe that. I'm like, that's fine. And I think spiritually it's the same way with Christians, right? Like all the time people are like, I got hurt by Christians, and it's very rarely what they believe. Like if you've ever thought about what a Christian believes, it's kind of crazy. Like we believe that a talking snake convinced the first man and woman to take a bite out of an apple and it changed the entire world. Like that's kind of wild. Like we believe that a virgin gave birth. And then she didn't just give birth to like a really good dude. It was like the Son of God. Like if you really think about it, we believe some wild stuff. And if you didn't grow up in that culture, you're like, man, those are hard things to maybe overcome sometimes. And it's fascinating though. I think very rarely people are betrayed by what somebody believes, but usually people are betrayed by how somebody treated them because of what they believed. And that's what I found. Most times when I talk to people and they're like, man, I was hurt by a Christian, usually it was like, oh, well, like, or, what happened, it wasn't usually a belief, it was how they were treated. It was, hey, I went to a church and something happened and they covered it up and they discarded me and it was poor leadership, it was injustice, right? They were covering something for their own expense. They had an agenda, right? It was, oh, I dated a Christian once and they were the worst relationship I ever had. It's like, oh, okay, because you were treated poorly, right? There are times where people are like, well, I struggle with anxiety and depression, and I just had a Christian who threw a couple scriptures at me and said if I really believed and really gave it to God, then I wouldn't feel this way anymore. So I've encountered lots of people like that. That it's very rarely are they betrayed by a belief, but they're betrayed by how somebody treated them because of a belief. And I think Christians, right, if you identify as a Christian today, you've probably been hurt by another Christian and how they treated you. I think too, you've probably hurt somebody by how you treated them, even without meaning to. Just kind of the way that it works. But today, I want you to know, like, I'm not here to rant on Christians, okay? But I am here to rave about our relationship with Christ and how that can really transform your life and how it can transform those around you and how it goes way further than just a belief. And so one of the first things that I wrote down is this, and I think this is a good litmus test on kind of where you're at, is that if your experience with Christianity or Christians has left you with more guilt and less joy, then you found religion, not a relationship. Think about it. So if your experience with Christianity, Christians, if you're walking in here today and you've had more guilt, less joy, then you found religion, not a relationship. And I know on the outside, those can kind of sound like similar things, like, right, religion, relationship. Some of you are like, well, mine is both, right? And so, but here's the deal. I think that they look similar externally, but they have very different internal motives, right? And I think sometimes when we think about a relationship, we discount how important relationships are. There's actually the longest human study that's been around, okay, is since 1938. So it's been going on almost a century now. And it's called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. This is where scientists sat down and they said, okay, we want to figure out what's the number one indicator of a happy, healthy life. So what they did was they tested all these people for decades and decades and decades. And here's what they found. The number one indicator of a happy, healthy life, it isn't how much you exercise. It isn't, whether you drink or smoke or don't drink or don't smoke or, it's not, it's not how much money you have. It's not how well behaved your kids are. The number one indicator of a happy, healthy life is the quality of your relationships. It's fascinating. And so spiritually, it's very similar. And so this will kind of help break down what is religion and what is a relationship. And so I wrote it down this way, is that religion is focused on law, while relationship is focused on love. So religion is that thing where it's like, okay, just give me the rules. Tell me what I need to know. Just like whatever I need to do to get the grade, I'll do that. Where relationship is centered around love. There's a little bit more that it demands of you. And so one of the things I find fascinating is when we talk about Christians, right? We're like how do you know somebody's a Christian? Right? Like today we would be like, well, somebody's a Christian by what they believe. which I think is fascinating, because if I set 100 of you down and I was like, what do Christians believe? I think we'd have 100 different answers. Do they drink? Do they not? Do they talk this way? Do they not? Do they watch these movies? Do they not? Right? There'd be like a million, like we probably couldn't even agree on that. But it's fascinating because back in Jesus' day, the disciples are like, how will people know that we're your disciples? Just like, you'll know they're my disciples by the way that they love. It's not by what they believe. It's not by, well, do they have these behaviors? No, it's by the way that you love. And so, real quick, in Scripture, Paul is one of these guys. He's the love master, okay? We call him the love guru because he wrote the love chapter. It's 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind. I did a wedding yesterday, okay? So I recited that one. I know it by heart. And good verse, all right? But the dude knows a thing or two about love. And he's writing to this church in Galatians, all right? It's a church in Galatia. And what happens is, what we've got these Gentiles who are converting to Christianity for the first time. We've got these Jews who are kind of the ones who kind of were more grown up in that faith. And so the Jews are talking to the Gentiles and they're like, well, these are the things you need to do to be a Christian. Like you need to, you can't say these things, you can't do these things, you can't eat these things, you got to be circumcised, you got to they've got this whole list of rules, they've got this whole law that you need to follow to become a Christian. And Paul steps in, he's like, no, you missed it. You missed the point. And I think, I think that's similar to us today. We can be like, what do I need to do to be a Christian? Okay, this, I need to talk this way, I can't do this, I can't do. And it's like, whoa, there's more to it. In fact, this is what Paul wrote, and I think it's fascinating. He said this, he says, I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, if righteousness, right standing with God, could be gained by behaviors and following the rules and doing this and that, then Christ died for nothing. But he says the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. It's like that's what matters. Faith expressing itself through love. And so I feel like I can relate to some of those Jews where I'm like, I was more raised in the faith. I raised more believing this type of stuff. My dad is a pastor for my whole life. And so for the past 26 years, he's been at a church in Kansas City. He's like my hero. I absolutely love him. And I go to him with any advice, anything, right? But even though I was raised, I feel like pretty well, I don't think I ever understood that. I think I was always like, well, just tell me what I need to do, right? And I was kind of that guy. I'm like, I don't want to get an A+, I want to get an A-, 89.5, round me up. Minimum amount of work, maximum amount of reward. I'm like, that's who I am, okay? I shouldn't have revealed that. But it's true. This is like, I don't want to overwork. I don't want to do too much. I just give me the bare minimum on what I have to do, okay? And so growing up, I feel like I confused these things. And I was way more focused on law than I was on love. Like there'd be times that I felt guiltier about missing church than I did about how I treated one of my coworkers. Like there'd be times that relationally when maybe I'd say something I shouldn't or did something I shouldn't, I would be more concerned at getting back in good graces with God than actually going and apologizing to the person that I hurt. I think so many times I was just like, how do I get back in right standing here, but I don't necessarily care what that meant to the person that I was next to. There were times when other people would mess up and it would elicit some feelings of superiority in me. I'm sick. I was. And I think it was all centered around this thought of well, I just want to, what do I need? Just tell me what I need to do, okay? I don't necessarily need to mean it. It doesn't necessarily need to affect those around me, but here's what Paul's saying. He's like, if it's all about the law, then Christ died for nothing. It's faith expressing itself through love. And I think, what if we were that today? What if we approached every relationship with faith expressing itself through love? Husbands, right? The next time we had conflict with our wife and we're like, but I'm right. And it's like, okay, whoa. What if it's not about the rules or who's right or what somebody did? What if we thought about the other person and we said, what would be loving to them? What would be faith expressing ourselves through love? Parents, I think we got a million things that we want our kids to think and feel and do. I'm like, okay, probably don't date these people, okay? Don't have these types of friends. I kind of want you to do this career path, act this way in certain situations, don't say those words that you learned from mom, all these things that I'm like, okay, I've got dit. And I'm like, don't you dare let your beliefs, don't dare hold your beliefs tighter than you hold your kids? What if we were faith expressing ourselves through love? And we thought about what would be the most loving to them? Coworkers, right? Anytime we're dealing with a coworker, I think, what if we were faith expressing ourselves through love, not faith expressing ourselves through a strongly worded email? It'd be different. It would. And so one of the things I wrote down that I think is helpful in thinking about this, is that religion, it's far more complicated, but it's less demanding, right? The law. It's more complicated. There's all these rules and do's and don'ts, and you're constantly thinking about it. But it's not very demanding of me. And then there's a relationship. Relationship is less complicated, but it's far more demanding. Love. Love is, it's not complicated, okay? I think we all know how to love somebody. But it's way more demanding of us. I want to take a moment real quick, and we're going to do a little pop quiz. And this is one you probably don't want to answer out loud, okay? Don't answer them out loud. Just think them in your head. Don't answer for your spouse, okay? This is just one of those things you just sit with, and because I didn't like my answers the first time I took this test. All right, so I'll ask you a couple questions. One is this: do you know why you should tell the truth? Yeah? Have you ever thought about that? You're why should I tell the truth? So it's the right thing to do, okay? Well, here's what law would say. Why should I tell the truth? Law would say, well, because the Bible says so, right? It's one of the big 10. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, okay? I grew up reading the King James Version, all right? Yeah, it's that's one of the, don't do it. That's why I shouldn't lie, because it's one of the 10 commandments. And okay, I think love would agree, don't lie, but it'd be kind of a different response. Love says, well, you're cheating somebody from the truth and you're covering yourself at someone else's expense. That's why you shouldn't lie, because it's hurting somebody else. Why should you respect others' boundaries? Any thoughts? You're well, God honors it. You'd be disappointing God if you did that. It's okay. Or, what would love say? Respecting somebody's boundaries shows people you love them more than you love your agenda. Right? It's not complicated, but it is demanding. Why should you be generous? What do you think? I grew up watching several televangelists. And they're like, if you give, $100, you're going to receive tenfold back. When you tithe, God will open the floodgates of heaven on you. And I'm like, okay, that's good. Yes, you're not wrong. Okay, I think that's right? That's in Scripture. But here's what love would say. Love would say, when you're generous, it helps the person you're being generous to. My notes say to pause for effect here. It's not complicated. It's not. Do you know why you shouldn't speak poorly about somebody else? You're like, well, God says not to gossip, right? It's worthy of death, and you should have your tongue cut out. And it's okay. Or it hurts somebody else, right? Because you're attacking someone's character with limited information in an environment where they're not offered an opportunity to defend themselves. Maybe that's why. And here's what I think. I think on the outside, right, when we think about law and we think about love, they may be similar results, but they have two completely different internal motives. One's just a little bit more complicated on justifying why you do this and why you don't do this. And the other one's if that's your dad calling, answer. It is, okay? Seriously. When I call my kids, they better answer today. But really, right, we've got this competition between law and love. And I think naturally, we probably land on one side or the other. I know for me, for years, I'm just the law part made a little bit more sense to me. And I cared more about this relationship than I did about actually asking for forgiveness for somebody else. It reminds me of the story of Jesus. He's telling this parable, Matthew. It's the father and his two sons. It's fitting on Father's Day, okay? He says this. He says, there was a man who had two sons. He went to the first son. He said, go to work today in my vineyard. And the son said, I will not. What a jerk, okay? He answered, but later then he changed his mind and he went. Then the father went to his other son, and he said the same thing. And the son answered, I will, sir. Good kid. But then he didn't go, and he didn't work in the vineyard. And Jesus asks, which of the two did what the Father wanted? The first, they answered. And Jesus said, you're correct, right? Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, the tax collectors, the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to show you the way of righteousness, but you didn't believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes did, and even after you saw this, you did not repent and you didn't believe him. That's a hard verse to process as a Christian. Because what Jesus is saying is what's more important is not saying the right things. What's more important is not, sucking up to the right people and the right thing. It doesn't matter if you say the wrong thing. It doesn't matter if you do. Which one is more loving to the Father? Even if you said the wrong thing, you went and did it anyway. You're like, okay, I think it's the right thing. I think it's more loving toward my Father if I do that. And that's what Jesus is saying. That you'll be surprised. It's not about saying the right things. It's not about believing the right things. It's about love. And so what I want to do, I want to show a video of a North Pointer. A video of a guy named Gabe who started attending a little while back at our Dream Center campus. And this is a guy who was bombarded with rules. He was bombarded with, shoulds. He was bombarded with, here's the law. Here's all the things you need to do to get right. When the whole entire time what he's longing for is a relationship. Let's check it out.
So I grew up in church. I grew up in a church that had no instruments. We had one song leader up at the front of the stage and the whole congregation sang. There was no piano, no organ, no anything. My family went to church, and it was a church that everyone wore slacks, a jacket, and a tie. And if you didn't have that, you at least wore khakis and a polo, and it was tucked in. The difficulty for me growing up was my family didn't fit that mold. We had a pretty messed up upbringing, but when we went to church, that's when we all put on our Sunday best and put on a happy face. So my parents got divorced twice. There was obviously judgment from the church there. They got remarried and things were off, but there was still a lot of judgment there. What all that taught me was, in the midst of a lot of difficulty at home, I could put on a face and put on my Sunday best, and I could fool anyone into believing that I was a good boy that sang songs, got up in front of the church and led hymns, and that's what I thought everyone believed. And I think somewhere along the line, I think that I thought I could fool God. Growing up with the difficulties that my family had, I resorted to coping mechanisms that were not healthy. Fast forward to high school or so, I approached one of the preachers at the church because there was some alluding to sexual sin in one of the messages. And I told him, hey, that's something that I've struggled with. I want to know if you can help me. It's very alienating. And later, the church didn't accept that well that he was helping me with that. Between that and between the other struggles that I had that I was just really pretty good at hiding, I decided that I just was going to distance myself away from the church that I grew up in. But along the line, my mom fell into drug abuse. My dad moved to West Plains to have a new family, and that's what he did. So I lived with my mom. My sister had already graduated high school. My brother moved out to go to Christian college in Arkansas. So it was then just my mother and I. So one boyfriend to become husband kicked us out. So what I did is I worked at the YMCA at the time. I thought it was a fine option to live in my '97 Ford Explorer. I had just enough things that could fill the back of it, and I could sleep in the back seat, and I could shower at my job. I remember being alone on Thanksgiving and getting a rotisserie chicken from Walmart and the mashed potatoes from the deli. People from my church obviously found out. So I was just driving myself, and people noticed the piles of clothes and shoes in the back of my Explorer. And so I moved in with 3 older ladies that took care of me. Somewhere along the line, they started keeping mail from me. They didn't want me to be around my mom. And the fact that these people that cared about me and went to church with me and cared about my faith, that they were keeping something from me, that it wasn't really fair to keep that from me. So I didn't go back. Started going to church again after I met my wife. So she brought me to church, and it was a fundamental Baptist church, but it was a very progressive compared to what I was used to. A drum set on stage, guitars on stage. We went there for 2 years. The lead pastor drove everything. At the time that I told him that worship ministry is something that I feel called to and that I want to pursue, I told him this, and he was like, okay, I think, we can probably put you in kid ministry for about 3 years and prove your loyalty and faithfulness, and then you can have my stamp of approval. Fast forward to when our worship leader left, then it was, hey, I think your time is now for worship ministry. So it felt so contradictory to what was said before. I said no, which was a difficult decision because that's something that I have a dream to do, that I feel called to do. So we started coming to North Point because of some friends. But what's so refreshing about North Point is that I think it's that true feeling of just come as you are. For so many years of my life, I held my fist and white-knuckled and thought that I could hold it all together, but there's just such freedom when you can let it all go. I think I was betrayed by the belief that I could hide from God, I could run from God, and that if I took care of the external parts of me, that's what He would see.
Well, I love Gabe, and I'm thankful that he's willing to share his story, and I think maybe a lot of us can relate to pieces of that story, and I know that this stuff can be complicated. It can be. People are complicated, people are messy, circumstances are confusing, and my hope today is that there's able to bring a little bit more clarity on what is our responsibility as Christ followers, what's our responsibility as humans, and how do we bring love to those around us? In fact, one of the things I wrote down was this, that there's a difference between believing in and believing that. I think we believe in a lot of things. But do we believe in things so much so that we're willing to change our life because of it? There's a famous story of a tightroper called Charles Blond, 1850s tightroper. So what he did was he spread a tightrope between Canada and the United States over the Niagara Falls. And he'd walk across it, and talented guy, right? The guy would go, he'd go forward, he'd go backward, he'd put on a blindfold, right? He'd go take some bubbly out there, right? He'd pop it, and he'd go, drink it down, and then he'd come on back, right? He took a wheelbarrow out there forward and backward, and he amassed this big following who would watch him do this. And one of the days what he did is he took the wheelbarrow, he went forward, he went backward, and then he came on back and he said, "Who believes I can go one more time with this wheelbarrow across this tightrope?" And they're like, "We believe." He's like, "Okay, who believes that I could do this with somebody in the wheelbarrow?" And they're like, "We believe." Who wants to volunteer to get in the wheelbarrow? Nope. And I'm like, I think this is us, right? Where we're like, okay, do we believe God is love? We're like, we believe. No, do we believe that God is like, he says, love your neighbor as yourself? We're like, we believe. Do we believe that that can change people's lives? We're like, we believe. Do we believe that he's explicit in saying that in scripture? We're like, we believe. Do we believe it so much so that we're willing to change our lives because of it? Any volunteers? It's not complicated, but it is demanding. Right? I realized that, right? When I became a father, I'm like, every selfish bone in my body got exposed. Didn't mean I changed. It just meant it got exposed. And I realized just how selfish I am. And I'm like, oh, it's hard. Here's what it says in Galatians. Paul, he continues to write to the Gentiles, to the Jews. He says this, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. Don't use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law, for all the rules, all the behavior, like the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. You're like, what does that mean? It means loving someone like you love you. And it's hard because I really like me. There's a story of a guy, last story I'll share. Story of a guy, Dan Black. We got a picture of Dan. Dan, before his accident, he was an outdoorsy guy. He'd run, he'd bike, he'd swim, he'd go camping. I don't know, I'm not outdoorsy. But he'd do all these things. And one day he was riding his bike and hit by a car. Woke up days later in the hospital, paralyzed from the waist down. Bad news. But there's some good news. They said there's an exploratory service or surgery, right, that they can provide that might be able to help him walk again. That's awesome. But it's going to cost 26,000 euro, and he just spent all his money in the hospital keeping him alive. Bad news. So he goes back home. He adjusts back to real life and what that looks like, and he works tirelessly for 4 years. He has to switch his job. He's trying to re-navigate everything. For 4 years, he works to save 26,000 euro. He schedules the surgery. He's weeks away from the surgery. He's got it, circled on his calendar. When he hears a story of a 7-year-old boy who was riding his bike, hit by a car, wakes up, paralyzed from the waist down. But there's an exploratory surgery that he can have that might be able to help him walk again. But the parents don't have any money left, and Dan did. He canceled his surgery. He went to the hospital. He gave the boy his money. There's actually another picture of Dan that we got over here, and it's a picture of Dan with his 7-year-old buddy. And when they asked Dan, they're like, what? Why would you do that? He said, well, I would have wanted somebody to do that for me. It's not going to be easy. It's not. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's not complicated, though. It's going to be so demanding. I just think about that. I'm like how crazy that is if we did that. One of the last things I wrote down, and it's a bold statement, but I really truly mean it, is that life is a gift and love is the point. I think life is a gift. And if you've been wondering maybe why you have less joy, more guilt, love will change that. When you love others as you would want to be loved, not only does it change them, but it changes you. And I love that Dan didn't pick out, he wasn't like, well, I did it because I just believe somebody's going to pay it forward for me. He's not like, well, I did it because I'm going to reap some benefits in heaven. Pretty cool. He's just like, it was the loving thing to do. So Jesus' teachings, love God, love others, love your enemy. Super threatening. It was real. I just think about us here. I'm like, what if we were a church known by the way that we love? Not by what we believe in, not by how cool our worship is. I like it, Not by, not by all these different things. Oh man, you guys have free coffee. That's cool. You guys just like, yeah, I know you guys have multiple campuses in different cities. That's so cool. I'm like, none of that matters. What if we weren't known by what we believe in, but we were known by, man, we believe in something so much that we're willing to go impact our community because of it. The Give Back events are all worth it, right? The Dream Center is worth it. Our community partners are worth it. Anything we can do to become more loving to those around us, because that's how we would love us. And it takes every one of us in here doing that. And I promise you this, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be so demanding. But I believe it's going to impact you more than you could have ever imagined. So let me pray that we'd be able to do that. Let me pray that goes to our marriage, that goes into our family, that goes into our community. Let's do that. Lord, I'm thankful. I'm thankful to be able to take a moment like this and just really search my heart. Expose the selfishness in me. Show me how I like loving me, and show me how I can do that for those around me. I pray for each one of us in here that we've got something that's been prompted in our heart, that we go do that. That wouldn't be something that we'd sit on. That wouldn't be something that we ignore, but that'd be something that we lean into. I just wonder how much of a difference that would make to that other person, and how much of a difference that would make to us when we do that. In your name.